A very good evening to all of you, all my esteemed co-panelists. It's a great honor and pleasure to share space with all of you. I think it's very appropriate, Rahul, that you brought up right at the start, Lachit Borphukon and the Lachit Divas that is being organized. The political considerations apart, the very fact that this was that part of India which all the time resisted any kind of imperialist invasions, whether it was of the Afghans, the Mughals, whoever came in, they were never able to occupy this place beyond a couple of years. The spirit of resilience, the spirit of courage, of battle, of that military spirit ensured that Kamrupa was kept free from all this influence. But the poll that you conducted also showed that people don't know about it. So why don't they know about it? Because we were not told about it. Every student of Indian history, perhaps by rote, knows the long laundry list of battles that we lost as a nation, from the Battle of Tarain, the battles of Panipat, the Anglo-Maratha, Anglo-Sikh, Anglo-Mysore wars, you name it, Battle of Buxar, Battle of Plassey, but the Battle of Saraighat, where Lachit actually won, would not be a part of our growing up years. Forget Assam, go deep down south to Kerala. The Battle of Kolachal. Here was a time when Martanda Varma of Travancore managed to defeat the Dutch East India Company, a company which was having its global axis of power from South Africa all the way to Japan, with a large part of India under its control. And Martanda Varma dealt a death blow to the Dutch East India Company and their imperialist designs in India as well. In any other country, Battle of Kolachal or the statues of Martanda Varma would be installed in every square and commemorated. But in our country, I think this whole idea of particularly the way we look at our past and history with a sense of self-loathing, with that sense of apologia, I think that's been something that's hand down from our colonial masters, perfected after independence by what is commonly known as the Nehruvian consensus, where I think even Nehru's most sympathetic biographer, S. Gopal, had said that his assessment of the so-called minority issue was not what the majority, thought about, but what the minority feels. And so even on vexatious issues like, say, the Somnath Mandir and so on, Pandit Nehru would perhaps rather have that structure being resurrected and handed over to the ASI, but not make it a living monument. So, this whole obsession of, you have to cut away from your past, the tenuous relation that exists with your past, and then make it in such a way that it's a fossilized monument in a museum, not a living tradition. That sadly has been the bane of at least Indian historiography. I know this session is not only about history, but different aspects of what that Indic view is. But history, I think, informs and instructs a large part of that view. But in that, narrative, especially post-independence, and ideologically tainted, narrative as well, political and ideological combination, I think we have given up these legitimate sense of pride that we need to have in our past. I must stress here that there's a very thin, slippery slope between jingoism and pride. But then every nation, and history is the tool where you can recognize yourself as a people, as a civilization, as a society. So history does have that utility of wanting to create that sense of genuine pride about your past, your ancestors, their achievements, which unfortunately in this, what will they think, what will he think, how will it affect today's society, today's politics, I think at that altar of political correctness, at the altar of political calculations and machinations, we have unfortunately made Indian history, the scapegoat, and generations therefore have grown up deracinated. We don't take pride in our own achievements. There is a spectacular disconnect with our past, and that's almost held up as a trophy, as a sense of pride. A complete erasure of the Indic achievements in various fields, be it philosophy, sciences, medicine, mathematics, architecture, you name it. Why does all of this not form part of our growing up years, our education? What is that unique Indic or Indian Bharatiya perspective which our children are never learning? Why are we so besotted by the Western model?
Well, you've identified who should actually carry the blame, and you seem to suggest it's the Nehruvian consensus. But why? That part of the question you haven't answered. So why would a nation awaking to life and freedom not want to celebrate its past, its civilizational history?
Along with celebration, Rahul, I think comes a lot of the darker aspects too of our past, which in the years, I think, being fair to the people who handled this country or got this country at a very difficult juncture. There was the scourge of partition, millions were displaced, millions, lost their lives and homes. In an earlier discussion with another, erudite politician, he literally gave it up by saying, we used history as a tool for nation building. And when history is employed for such a task, for nation building, for creating trust, so to say, between communities who have just come out of the scourge of a bloody partition, the need is felt that uncomfortable truths should not be spoken. Because somehow, someone is going to feel bad, or it's going to demonize a group, or it's going to make, contemporary society, feel offended. But dare I say that, the edifice of national unity, or this imagined edifice of national unity cannot rest on the shaky foundations of fabricated history. Because fabrication can last only for that much time. As and how more truth emerges, light is the best disinfectant, more truth emerges, more people are going to question the fabrication that has been done willfully over so many generations. And at that time, social cohesion, which was your goal objective, that is going to go for a toss because people are going to, question the status quo, and there's going to be unrest and anarchy, which is what we are seeing manifesting all the time. All our wars today on news channels, between politicians, is on matters of the 17th century, 18th century. Sometimes I wonder, are Aurangzeb, Tipu Sultan, are these people running elections these days? Because most of our valuable public time is spent only discussing all these people. And that's because we haven't made peace with our past. Tell the truth as it is. Be honest with the past. Stare it in the face and get done with it. I think we've had a very, very troubled history. Subterfuge, fabrication, whitewashing, with some imagined objective of today's social unity is not going to help a country as diverse and pluralistic as India. Let's make peace with it. Let us heal a truth and reconciliation of sorts as a society, and then move on and build a better future.
I don't think it's that innocent. I'll give you perhaps a nugget. So, Roshan Seth, the actor, plays Nehru in Bharat Ek Khoj. And in the episode that speaks of Prithviraj Chauhan, it ends with a reference to Prithviraj Raso, which speaks of how Ghori was killed by a blinded Prithviraj Chauhan. And that's how that particular story ends. But Nehru's comment with respect to that particular ending is, this is perhaps make-believe. And I don't think this would have been the case. And that perhaps a defeated people are trying to invent fables and legends to assuage or mollify their own defeated sentiments. That seems to be the running train of Nehruvian thought across his works. And this is not, let's say, a sample position that you take out of context. This is his running thought. Now, I would agree with Mr. Khurshid if assume for a moment two sets of scholars with divergent opinions were equally patronized for their positions in scholarship. And then the public had an opportunity to consume both points of view and to determine which of these is more evidence-based, which of these is more consistent with the immediate incident of the partition or the ghastly episode of the partition, and which of these is more believable. What is it that we would like to draw lessons from? Now, it so happens that a particular line of historians were completely kept outside the pale of the establishment. R.C. Majumdar, Jadunath Sarkar, all of these people who were comfortable presenting uncomfortable truths were relegated to the margins. So therefore, it's not as if all historians who were willing to present a certain point of view were given an opportunity. So I'm not willing to buy that. Second, assume for a moment that the ghastly specter of partition hadn't taken place, and we were still living in an undivided, united India. I would still buy the premise to some extent that why would you want to dig up an uncomfortable past when somehow after 1,000 years of bloodshed, two major communities have managed to find peace to live with each other alongside each other as part of a single nation. But after the partition, on the basis of a two-nation theory, which clearly has a religious basis, what mythical unity are you trying to build and what mythical peace are you trying to build after millions of people have already lost their lives and Bharat has lost about 30% of its land, so to speak, at the very least? So what is this unity that you're trying to build on the altar of falsified history? I can understand that there's an incentive to build this unity and this peace-building initiative, provided the partition hadn't taken place. But after the partition, at the very least, the government has an obligation to place historical facts. Allow people to come forward and say that this is what has happened, there is a continuum as far as this particular mindset is concerned, and there cannot be a repeat of this particular mindset for the benefit of our own people. Now, I am not willing for a moment to buy the fact that the exodus, the forced exodus of Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir, has nothing to do with the mindset that resulted in the partition. I am unable to buy that particular fact. Therefore, this is not an archival study in the past. It is as much a study of an ongoing present, which is going to repeat itself, or at least, at the very least, is repeating itself across several parts of the country. Therefore, I don't think history is merely a question of looking back, learning certain lessons and moving forward. Because if it were that easy, why would you have placards with respect to Aryan invasion theory at every protest relating to a reservation? So history remains relevant to every contemporary discussion, unfortunately or fortunately so. Then we might as well ensure that there is a plurality of voices. So here's one suggestion that I make. And this is on the basis of my discussion with several historians. And I hope Dr. Vikram Sampad weighs in on this. Perhaps history should be taken away from the realm of the government altogether, and let there be a body of independent experts who are in a position to arrive at some kind of consensus with respect to what kind of curriculum needs to be presented in school syllabi. This happens in other countries. We seem to be learning the worst of principles from the West. But the best of principles also means independent actors and independent experts on subject matter, they come together and they formulate the study. And parents are invited for their inputs on whether you want this particular thing to be presented as school curriculum, so on and so forth. That's a suggestion that's possible. But you see, the so-called non-left in this country would still be comfortable with that particular suggestion. But those who believe that history needs to be utilized to perpetuate a particular myth about this particular country as a defeated society and as a defeated nation would never want to let go of any kind of control over history as a domain and humanities as a domain. That's been the reality. As someone who has spent a significant amount of time talking to students across campuses in several lectures, this much I can vouch for a fact, that history is a real battleground. And that means it translates to policy making, it translates to curriculum, it translates to legal education, it translates to all kinds of submissions being made even before the Supreme Court of the land. I'm sure you followed the arguments that were presented as part of the EWS case before the Supreme Court. I would say that was a textbook instance of Nehruvian distorted history being mainstreamed through arguments before the highest court of the land. And I was very happy that people could finally see what kind of versions of history have actually been bought lock, stock and barrel by members of the establishment, so the so-called Nehruvian establishment, and what is being presented to oppose the EWS. I'm not on the question of EWS, but on how history was weaponized in the Supreme Court during the course of a policy discussion. So I'm very clear that history is never going to be free of contestation. I'm only hoping that people have the courage of their conviction and the honesty to wear their biases on their sleeve and allow the evidence to speak for itself, so that the public can ask itself whether the bias prevails over the evidence or the evidence prevails over the bias. That's something for people to decide. That's what I'm here for. The meal starts with a sweet. So let me start with a point of agreement with Mr. Verma. On the aspect of colonization and on the impact of colonization, I don't think I have anything to disagree with at all. That it has much more pernicious and far more, let's say, far-reaching effects than the use of the sword. I completely agree with on that. And I think we are still reeling from the impact of it, which is very clear. I don't think we are wearing the Mughal clothes. We are wearing the clothes of the British man for all practical purposes, at least some of us. So therefore, I understand that particular issue. But this much is clear from the points made by Mr. Khurshid and Mr. Verma, that one believes that that was a wave of migration, and the other is clear, citing material, that this was not a migration, this was a bloody invasion, as bloody as it could get in the history of humankind. Now, this is what I wish to highlight to make one point. To choose to observe a strategic silence in the interest of peace is very different from actively indulging in denial of history. And that's exactly where the problem starts. So if an entire school is established that goes about whitewashing stuff as opposed to saying, let's not touch this particular aspect of history, which I think is also not possible. How do you choose to remain silent over one particular aspect of your history? That's not going to happen. So then the only option is to speak about it. Now, why should the discussion with respect to something that has happened in the past result in acrimony in the present, unless someone relates to the invader even in the present and someone does not relate to the invader even in the present? In which case, the two-nation theory is well alive and kicking. That's one. But factually speaking, one particular trope I think needs to be busted because I think it's been sold well beyond its sell-by date. I'm sorry to say, after partition, people did not choose to stay here. The elections prior to the partition of 1946 spoke volumes. And that's a very clear decision taken at the ballot. And therefore, when you choose to speak about history, let's be clear that perhaps practical considerations came into existence which prevented a mass migration, but certainly not patriotic considerations or Bharatiya considerations. I think that myth needs to be busted, and we cannot sell it any further. 3, on Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb. Well, while I have several reservations with Dr. Ambedkar, the one thing that he was crystal clear about in his book, Pakistan or the Partition of India, which was published on the eve of the partition, 2 books were published by Rajendra Prasad in 1946 and Dr. Ambedkar in 1946. In which he clearly says that the so-called Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, or the syncretic culture that is celebrated over and over again, is a product of the incomplete conversion of the converted Hindu to Islam. And therefore, multiple waves of attempts have been made on a regular basis to remove the remnants of that Hinduness from that particular convert, which is what has been pushed in this country as what we know as Wahhabism. To say that the new convert shall identify himself with the early converts to Islam, and therefore you cannot have any ties whatsoever or any cultural practices whatsoever which remind you of your ancestor. That starts with the language, that moves to dressing, so on and so forth. So let's be clear. If acrimony is the result or is going to be the result of a discussion with respect to the medieval period in current day Bharat and contemporary Bharat, that is because there are still people who relate to this particular person or this particular invader. Had that not been the case, why should there be a resistance with respect to the reclamation of a particular, let's say, structure that was built by an invader? Whether it's Babri Masjid or Gyanvapi Mandir or so on and so forth, these were built by invaders. Obviously, they were not built after the independence of this particular country. This is not a structure that has come into existence after 15th of August 1947. Why do you relate to this particular structure? Because the mindset that has been imposed on you at the peril of the sword and let's say at the pain of death prevents you from accepting your past. And therefore, it's going to be a constant tussle each time there's a discussion with respect to the past. So I refuse to buy the fact that history is no more relevant or that it's possible for us to have these discussions objectively. I agree with Mr. Verma on this point. It cannot be objective. That's exactly why I concluded my first opening submission by saying all of us have our biases. It's impossible for us to say that we don't have biases. We are human beings. Impossible. We may choose not to bring out certain proclivities and, let's say, ideological leanings to the fore for reasons of pragmatism, whatever it may be. But let the evidence speak for itself. But if the evidence leads to a different conclusion and it has consequences on the street or elsewhere, then the people who choose to resort to the street merely because truth is being presented in a public forum are to be blamed. History is not to be blamed, and certainly not those people who wish to present that version of history before the public.
Mr. Khurshid,
I think the dire need, and I think I would like to address the point Mr. Khurshid made, that the converse is actually true in my view, that hyphenating today's communities, specifically today's Muslims, the albatross of Ghazni and Ghori and Aurangzeb and Tipu does not lie on any of their shoulders. A young Muslim man or woman is not responsible for them. But on the converse, by trying to whitewash and erase these excesses committed by these invaders, somewhere the policymakers in the last 70 years, perhaps knowingly or unknowingly, have tried to tell them that if we talk about this, you are going to feel, offended. So why are you hyphenating them with these invaders in the first place? It's the boot is on the other foot. Now, when we talk of the excesses of the East India Company, no one is worrying that the Christians of India are going to get offended. We very openly talk. Dr. Shashi Tharoor has written an entire classic on the Inglorious Empire. But why not something on the Islamic conquest of India, as Will Durant had mentioned? There, why does this thought come that it's going to make someone feel uncomfortable? So by doing that, subconsciously and subliminally, somewhere the people on a certain ideological disposition have already put that albatross on the shoulders of a particular community. And if, first of all, you don't need members of one religion as icons for that religion. A Hindu, a Parsi, a Jain, or whatever can be an icon even for a Muslim boy or girl. You don't have to make Aurangzeb look secular. There are crazy people who also say he protected more temples than he, destroyed them. Just like probably Hitler would have probably murdered lesser Jews than he could have. But then, why do you have to do all that to ensure that, that community finds an icon? In my state, Karnataka, Tipu Sultan is today made almost like this symbol or an icon of a particular community. Whereas there are living memories of hatred against him beyond politics and political parties, among the Kodavas, among the Mangalore Christians, Syrian Christians, the Catholics, the Nayars of Malabar, the Mandyam Iyengars, all of them, which is as much living history. So I think this dehyphenation is most important. You don't need members of the same community as icons for them. Even if you need that, you may have syncretic examples of a Dara Shikoh or a Ras Khan or Rahim and so on, whom you can draw, rather than do this subterfuge that, whitewash these crimes. And that, I think, so actually the argument is on the other side than what Mr. Khurshid made, in my view.